Hey everybody, this is a short interview with Milovan Djilas from someone named Carl Ludwig Bayer, and was originally published in Neue Epoche in 1988 to 1989, and translated from German by David Pan. Yeah, so I'm gonna look up some of these people. Come on. Shit. Could Carl Ludwig Bayer. I'm not seeing anything come out of this guy, so skip that. If you don't know who Milovan Djilas is, I should look him up. Milovan Djilas, who lived from 1911 to 1995, was a Yugoslav communist politician, theorist, and author. Djilas was a key figure in the partisan movement during World War II, as well as in the post-war government. A self-described identified democratic socialist, Djilas became one of the best-known and prominent dissidents in Yugoslavia and all of Eastern Europe. During an era of several decades, Milovan Djilas critiqued communism from the viewpoint of trying to improve communism from within. After the revolutions of 1989 and the violent breakup of Yugoslavia, Milovan Djilas critiqued it from an anti-communist viewpoint of someone whose youthful dreams had been disillusioned. Where am I? Okay. So that's Milovan Djilas. I'm looking for, see if there's something on his book, The New Class. His main book was The New Class, An Analysis of the Communist System. The New Class, An Analysis of the Communist System is a political theory book about the concept of the new class by communist Yugoslav figure and intellectual Milovan Djilas. Milovan Djilas proposed the party-state officials formed a class which, quote, uses, enjoys, and disposes of nationalized property, end quote. Djilas. I'm going to read what it's a short entry for the Wikipedia, so I'm just going to read it because I think it'll be helpful to, even if some of this information is inaccurate, it'll get me at least working in wrapping my head around the context of Djilas' work. Djilas discussed the root of modern communism in this chapter. Oh, this is a fucked up Wikipedia. The initial sentence doesn't make sense. Alright, fuck it, I'll just read it. Djilas discussed the roots of modern communism in this chapter, with the communists citing Marx. The, quote, replacement of capitalism can take place only by revolutionary means, end quote. Yet he confesses that, quote, almost nothing remains of original Marxism, ... Only a residue of formalism and dogmatism remained of Marx's dialectics and materialism. This was used for the purpose of cementing power, justifying tyranny, and violating human conscience, end quote. Revolutions only took place in Russia, China, and Yugoslavia. Communism was imposed on Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria by the Soviet Army and made identical to the USSR system. Character of the Revolution is the new section. In this chapter, Djilas discusses Okay, so it's about each chapter, I guess. In this chapter, Djilas discusses the communist centralization of power and the exclusion of other political groups. Djilas states, quote, "At the same time, they demand uniformity of all viewpoints, including practical political views as well as theoretical, philosophical, and even moral views," end quote. Additionally, he concludes, quote, "Ownership is nothing other than the right of profit and control. If one defines class benefits by this right, the communist states have seen, in the final analysis, the origin of a new form of ownership or of a new ruling and exploiting class," end quote. Djilas. New section, the new class. Djilas defines the new class in this chapter as the political bureaucracy, quote, "a monopoly over the working class itself," end quote. This, quote, "new class actually seized the lion's share of the economic and other progress earned by the sacrifices and efforts of the masses," end quote. Djilas attributes the rise of this new class to Stalin. New section, the party state. In this chapter, Djilas claims that the Communist Party, quote, "is the backbone of the entire political, economic, and ideological activity," end quote, with public life determined by, quote, "what happens at party forums," end quote. This is a fucked up Wikipedia. He further states, quote, "regardless of laws, everyone knows that the government is in the hands of the party committees and the secret police," end quote. Final section, national communism. Djilas foresaw the future independence movement in Eastern Europe. Quote, "the communist East European countries did not become satellites of the USSR because they benefited from it, but because they were too weak to prevent becoming satellites of the USSR. As soon as they become stronger or as favorable conditions are created, a yearning for independence and for protection of, quote, their own people," end quote, "from Soviet hegemony will arise among them," end quote. Furthermore, quote, "the Central European government has found itself in difficulty because of the nationalism existing even in those governments which it installed in the Soviet republics, Ukraine, Caucasia, and still more so with regard to those governments installed in the East European countries," end quote. All right, so I think we got enough background information. I think we can just start. I am going to be looking things up, so don't get mad. Bayer. Alexander Dubcek received an honorary doctorate from the University of Bologna in November 1988. Most Italian newspapers considered Dubcek the leading figure of the, quote, Prague Spring of 1968, a precursor to Gorbachev. In contrast, Stampa takes the view that perestroika is not bringing about liberalization but a destabilization. In this sense, Gorbachev's reform policies have already reached their limit. Sorry. Alexander Dubcek was a Slovak statesman who served as the first secretary of the Presidium of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia, de facto leader of Czechoslovakia from 1968 to April 1969, as chairman of the Federal Assembly from 1989 to 1992 following the Velvet Revolution. Dubcek oversaw significant reforms to the communist system during a period that became known as the Prague Spring, but his reforms were reversed, and he was eventually sidelined following the Warsaw Pact invasion in August 1968. Best known by the slogan, "Socialism with a Human Face," Dubcek led a process that accelerated cultural and economic liberalization in Czechoslovakia. Reforms were opposed by conservatives inside the party who benefited from the Stalinist economy, as well as interest in the neighboring Soviet bloc who feared contagion, Western subversion, strategic vulnerability, and loss of institutional power. For reasons of institutional interest in the Soviet Union, such as those of the military and KGB, false reports, and the growing concern among Soviet leadership that Dubcek was no longer able to maintain control of the country, Czechoslovakia was invaded by 500,000 Soviet-led Warsaw Pact troops on the night of 20th to the 21st of August 1968. This was intended to enable a coup by conservative forces. The coup, however, could not materialize due to lack of viable pro-Soviet replacement leadership and the unexpected extraordinary popularity of Dubcek and the reformist leadership. Soviet intervention ushered in a period of maneuver between conservatives and reformers where conservatives relied on Soviet influence to shift the balance of power, reversing reforms of the Prague Spring. Dubcek was forced to resign as party head in April 1969, succeeded by Gustav Huzak, a former reformer and victim of Stalinism who was ambiguously favored by Moscow. This signaled the end of the Prague Spring and the beginning of normalization. Dubcek was expelled from the Communist Party in 1970 amid a purge that eventually expelled almost two-thirds of the 1968 party membership. This mostly purged the younger generation of the post-Stalin and communists that he represented, along with many of the most competent technical experts and managers. During the Velvet Revolution in 1989, Dubcek served as the chairman of the Federal Czechoslovak Parliament and contended for the presidency with Václav Havel. The European Parliament awarded Dubcek the Sakharov Prize the same year. In the interim between the Prague Spring and the Velvet Revolution, Dubcek withdrew from high politics but served as a leading inspiration and symbolic leader for Eurocommunism, maintaining intermittent contact with European communist reformers, especially in Italy and the Soviet Union. Also in 1989, just before his death, Andrei Sakharov would write, quote, "I am convinced that the, quote, breath of freedom," end quote, which the Czechs and the Slovaks enjoyed when Dubcek was their leader, was a prologue to the peaceful revolutions now taking place in Eastern Europe and Czechoslovakia itself, end quote. Sakharov credited Dubcek and the Prague Spring as his inspiration. At the time of his death in an automobile crash in 1992, Dubcek remained an important political figure. Many saw Dubcek as the destined future president of the newly formed Slovakia. Since that time, Dubcek's life and work have been significantly reevaluated. This comes after long being overshadowed by simplistic Cold War narratives and rhetoric. According to Jan Adamec, a historical scholar based in Prague, quote, "I think there is a trend that became apparent around 2009 and became even more visible after Václav Havel's death, which shows certain reconsideration of the period between 1968 and 1989. The picture is becoming more diverse and is no longer as black and white as it was in the 1990s, the communist evil and the fearful suppressed society. The picture is now gaining a variety of colors," end quote. So that's Alexander Dubcek. If you didn't know. I'm going to assume you know about the Prague Spring, and I'm going to assume you know who Gorbachev is. Djilas responds, like Dubcek, Gorbachev is a product of the crisis. Nevertheless, Dubcek can somehow be considered a precursor to Gorbachev. Yet Gorbachev's appearance was totally independent of Dubcek and would have come about even if Dubcek had never existed. The Soviets take into account what occurs in other countries, in Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, or Hungary, but they follow their own course. I think they are indeed striving for liberalization. It is no trick, no maneuver, no swindle, but this liberalization has its limits. First, this system will not allow the rise of a market economy, if this is understood to mean the rise of free and diverse forms of property. Second, no pluralistic system, no multi-party tendency, no pluralistic system, no multi-party system can develop. There have always been many different tendencies within communism. Stalin liquidated all currents except his own. He physically annihilated and repressed them through his tyranny. At present, different currents are reappearing. These new currents are different, however, from those that existed in Lenin's time. Then these currents searched along various paths for the authentic and most efficient communism. Today there are strong tendencies seeking a revision of fundamental communist doctrines. But there are still hardliners who practice strong-arm politics. They argue for totalitarian domination. Driving these forces back is the most important task in this struggle. On the one hand, we are seeing the disintegration of communist ideology in the communist system. On the other, one can conclude, e.g. from the events in Yugoslavia, that the disintegration of ideology, even of the party, does not necessarily mean a disintegration of state power. Gorbachev has realized that the party can no longer be a mobilizing factor. For this reason, Gorbachev is shifting the emphasis to the state apparatus. In the process, Gorbachev must compromise with the party bureaucracy and consequently must act cautiously. Bayer asks, does this mean that the power structure has a longer lifespan and more stability than the ideology? Djilas says, the power structure is certainly more stable than the ideology. Up to now, we have always proceeded from the fact of a party-controlled state. We always thought that the state is only as strong as the party. But now the party is weakening, yet despite ideological disintegration, corruption, and the disintegration of its monopoly on domination, the power of the state remains. Bayer asks, but all power requires legitimation. How does a regime justify itself after that regime's ideology has lost its credibility? Is a state and nationalist consciousness taking the place of no longer marketable Marxist promises? Djilas says, undoubtedly, every system or regime requires an intellectual justification. Today, the return to Russian history, tradition, and national consciousness also serves in a sense as a legitimation of domination. The quote national, end quote, partially takes the place of the quote Marxist, end quote. Marxism and Marxism's communist variant has become a banal ideology without creative energy. Marxism and its communist variant has become downright ridiculous. Thus, in schools, jokes are regularly made about it. Among school children in Yugoslavia, a common saying goes, quote, you're as boring as Marxism, end quote. There's spiritual emptiness. Many people turn back to religion, to national values, to democratic ideas. Bayer asks, can this new nationalism support state power as a justification of domination, or is it rather a destabilizing force, a motivation for national uprisings? Djilas says, both are possible. Gradually, everyone is becoming a nationalist. In Romania and Albania, totalitarian communism is identical with the form of totalitarian nationalism. In Romania and Albania, nationalism supports domination. Yet there are also counter-instances. Here in Yugoslavia, e.g. in Slovenia, liberalism and pluralism under the rubric of nationalism are on the rise. Something similar is taking place in Poland, where a pluralism has arisen with an intense nationalist tone and anti-Russian overtones. The Catholic Church and Solidarity are independent forces, and some pluralist tendencies even exist in the dominant party. Developments in Hungary are roughly similar. Nationalism can only be stabilizing when the leadership identifies itself with it. When nationalism is directed against the leadership, it is destabilizing. And Bayer says, with respect to the Soviet Union, Ernst Topich has spoken of, quote, military patriotism, end quote, which the leadership is using to support itself. Let's see if there's anything comes up for Ernst Topich. German Wikipedia says, Ernst Topich, who lived from 1919 to 2003, was an Austrian philosopher and sociologist. It says the basic aim of his scientific work can be found in his early writings, the ideology, critical analysis of worldviews on the basis of a scientific worldview, Vienna Circle. Topich draws on the criticism of religion and ideology by Heinrich Gompertz and Hans Kelsen. In particular, Kelsen's method of proving logical contradictions, empty formulas, and projections, example, criticism of natural law, became scientific model for him. It says Topich's ideology critical works are not limited to legal, logical, and epistemological analysis in the sense of Viennese post-positivism. Historical overviews, which in his work On the Origin and End of Metaphysics, 1958, range from antiquity to modern times. Hegel, Marxism, Nazism, Socialism, Stalinism deal with the practical, political, and social consequences of various ideologies, worldviews, or religions in the past and present. Consequence analysis, critical cultural sociology. The critique of metaphysics implicit in logical empiricism is carried out concretely. See especially his critique of Immanuel Kant, Hegel, Karl Marx, Carl Schmitt, Jürgen Habermas, and the Frankfurt School. He has a bunch more stuff, but it would be beyond it wouldn't be worth reading. Djilas responds, the Soviet Union cannot become totalitarian on the basis of nationalism. Quote, military patriotism, end quote, has always existed, even in Russia under the Tsars. Such a large country cannot be controlled without a military. But a military dictatorship is out of the question. A multinational state cannot have a nationalist totalitarian dictatorship because because it would set off rebellions among all other peoples. Presently, the Russians would not be able to quell such rebellions. They would be able to intervene, but they would be incapable of suppressing large national movements because of their potential opponents, because all of their potential opponents would support these movements. And Bayer says, within NATO, there has been discussion concerning an appropriate response to recent developments in the Soviet Union. Americans have criticized West Europeans for providing the Soviets with credit and technology, thereby releasing the Soviets from the necessity of having to decide between, quote, guns or butter, end quote. As the Americans see it, if Helmut Kohl goes to Moscow with 3 billion marks in his trunk, then the Soviets will find themselves in the comfortable situation of being able to afford both guns and butter. End quote. Excuse me, both, quote, guns and butter, end quote. Wikipedia says, Helmut Kohl was a German politician who served as Chancellor of Germany from 1982 to 1998 and leader of the Christian Democratic Union, CDU, from 1973 to 1998. Helmut Kohl's 16-year tenure is the longest of any German chancellor since Otto von Bismarck and oversaw the end of the Cold War, the German reunification, and the creation of the European Union. Furthermore, Helmut Kohl's tenure of 16 years, 26 days is the longest of any democratically elected chancellor of Germany. Born in Ludwigshafen to a Catholic family, Kohl joined the CDU in 1946 at the age of 16. Kohl earned a PhD in history at Heidelberg University in 1958 and worked as a business executive before becoming a full-time politician. Helmut Kohl was elected as the youngest member of the Parliament of Rhineland-Palatinate in 1959, and from 1969 to 1976 was Minister-President of the Rhineland-Palatinate State. During the 1960s and early 1970s, as a progressive within the CDU, Helmut Kohl was elected national chairman of the party in 1973. After Helmut Kohl had become party leader, Helmut Kohl was increasingly seen as a more conservative figure. In the 1976 and 1980 federal elections, Helmut Kohl's party performed well, but the social liberal government of the Social Democrat Helmut Schmidt was able to remain in power. After Schmidt had lost the support of the liberal FDP in 1982, Kohl was elected chancellor through a constructive vote of no confidence. Forming a coalition government with the FDP, Helmut Kohl chaired the G7 in 1985 and 1992. As Chancellor, Helmut Kohl was committed to European integration and especially the Franco-German relationship. Helmut Kohl was also a steadfast ally of the United States and supported Ronald Reagan's more aggressive policies to weaken the Soviet Union. Following the revolutions of 1989, Helmut Kohl's government acted decisively, culminating in the German reunification in 1990. Helmut Kohl and French President François Mitterrand were the architects of the Maastricht Treaty, which established the European Union and the euro currency. Kohl was also a central figure in the eastern enlargement of the EU, and his government led the effort to push the international recognition of Croatia, Slovenia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina when the states declared independence. Helmut Kohl played an instrumental role in resolving the Bosnian War. Domestically, Kohl's policies from 1990 focused on integrating former East Germany into the reunified Germany, and he moved the federal capital from the, quote, provisional capital, end quote, of Bonn back to Berlin, although Kohl never resided there because the government offices were only relocated in 1990. Helmut Kohl also greatly increased federal spending on arts and culture. After his chancellorship, Helmut Kohl became honorary chairman of the CDU in 1998, but resigned from the position in 2000 in the wake of the CDU donation scandal, which damaged his reputation domestically. Helmut Kohl received the 1988 Charlemagne Prize and was named Honorary Citizen of Europe by the European Council in 1998. Following his death, Helmut Kohl was honored with the first ever European Act of State in Strasbourg. Kohl was described as the, quote, greatest European leader of the second half of the 20th century, end quote, by U.S. Presidents George W. Bush and Bill Clinton. So that's who Helmut Kohl is. Back to the text. Djilas responds, the 3 billion marks which Kohl promised to the Russians is just a drop in the bucket. Other Western nations are offering credit in a competitive struggle for Soviet markets. But the Soviet system is so disorganized that such aid had little impact. If one were to place at the Soviets' disposal the most advanced Western technology, it would become obsolete before the Soviets could use it. But among Russians, both the feeling of being a great and powerful state as well as the fear of disintegration, the fear of the outside world are still very strong. If they have to choose between, quote, guns or butter, end quote, they will always choose guns. I am no one's advisor, but in my opinion, the West's political position in response to Gorbachev's reforms should be positive, though not blind. Openness to the Soviet Union should increase at the same pace that the Soviet Union transforms the Soviet Union self internally so as to pose less of an external threat. And Bayer asks, but is this really possible? In your book, Conversations with Stalin, you describe how the Soviet dictator sought to dominate all of Europe. One second. Conversations with Stalin is a historical memoir by Yugoslav communist and intellectual Milovan Djilas. The book is an account of Djilas' experience of several diplomatic trips to Soviet Russia as a representative of the Yugoslav communists. Writing in hindsight, Djilas recounts how his initial enthusiasm and feelings of ideological and ethnic brotherhood towards the Russian communists were replaced by feelings of bitterness and disappointment following his repeated confrontations with the brutal, despotic reality of the Soviet regime under Joseph Stalin. Other figures which appear in the memoir include Josip Broz Tito, Alexander Rankovich, and Edvard Kardelj of Yugoslavia, Vyacheslav Molotov, Ivan Stepanovich Konev, and Nikita Khrushchev of the Soviet Union, and Georgy Dimitrov of Bulgaria. So that's Conversations with Stalin. Djilas responds to Bayer. He wanted to control Germany, or Stalin wanted to control Germany and all of Europe, but today it is different because the West is much stronger, though clearly not so strong as to be able to dictate terms to the Soviet Union. Moreover, such would not even be wise, since it could strengthen chauvinistic and totalitarian tendencies. It would also be a mistake to offer the Soviet Union unreserved cooperation, which some capitalists are ready to do. Expectations of profit should not be the deciding factor. Western governments must retain control. At the moment, Gorbachev does not pose a danger to the West, but this could change. And Bayer asks, when the French Revolution reached the end of its program to improve the world, it changed under Napoleon into a military imperialism. Could that also happen with the Russian Revolution? Djilas says, that comparison is very schematic. Open Soviet expansionism more or less ended after Stalin. What came after in countries like Angola or Afghanistan was rather the expansion of a large state. Different from the earlier colonial imperialism of Western nations, this expansion of power only resulted in large economic losses. Bayer asks, is it then conceivable, considering the ideological disintegration, that Moscow might one day be prepared to jettison some of its ballast? In the last century, Russia eventually sold Alaska to the United States. Do you think it is possible that something similar might happen again, that Moscow might give up some of the marginal western provinces of its enormous empire in return for economic concessions? And Djilas responds, In terms of its structure, the Soviet Empire is different from earlier Western colonial empires. British and French colonies were not part of the motherland. The system of domination that existed in the colonies were very different from those in the European states. Moscow's expansion proceeded in such a way that all the annexed territories became in effect parts of the Soviet Union. In Russian consciousness, the detachment of any one of these territories would mean a disintegration of the state. The only possibility seems to be a stronger regard for the aspirations to national independence on the part of the separate peoples within the Soviet Empire. Gorbachev's reforms cannot be realized without granting more extended political rights to individual republics. Admittedly, communists are not true nationalists, but nationalists for the sake of domination. National communist parties will attempt to solidify their position in their own countries to the same degree that ideology loses its significance. Developments in Eastern Europe may signal the establishment of a sort of loose commonwealth. Bayer asks, then what will remain of communism? Milovan Djilas responds, very little. Of course, the disintegration of ideology proceeds not abruptly but gradually. The Soviet Politburo does not simply sit down one day, as Solzhenitsyn might have imagined, and decide to abandon ideology. But already, most functionaries no longer believe socialist property makes any sense. For example, the only chance seen in Yugoslavia is to turn away from a planned economy. It is the only hope of controlling the economic situation of preventing the elimination of leading functionaries. It has gone so far that Stipa Suvar? What the hell? One second. Where am I? Where am I? Okay, sorry, the thing crapped out. Where's the name that I was looking for? It's gone so far that Stipa Suvar, the Federal Party chairman, jokingly remarked at a conference with foreign journalists that we are on the path of a, quote, peaceful transition from socialism to capitalism, end quote, a reversal of the social democratic model. Wikipedia says Stipa Suvar lived from 1936 to 2004 and was a Croatian politician and sociologist who was regarded to have been one of the most influential communist politicians in the League of Communists of Croatia, SKH, and SR Croatia in the 1980s during Yugoslavia. Suvar entered politics in 1972, being co-opted to the Central Committee of the SKH. 2 years later, Stipa Suvar became SR Croatia's Minister of Education and performed a controversial educational reform in Croatia. In the 1980s, Stipa Suvar was a member of the presidency of SKH Central Committee, then a member of the presidency of the Central Committee of the League of Communists of Yugoslavia. In 1989, Croatian Parliament appointed Suvar to represent SR Croatia in the 8-member presidency of Yugoslavia, but dismissed him 1 year later when, after the first multi-party election in Croatia was already dominated by the Croatian Democratic Union, HDZ, of Franjo Tudman. After the collapse of communism and the breakup of Yugoslavia, Suvar founded the now-defunct magazine Hrvatska Ijevika, which existed from 1994 to 2005, and a minor leftist party, the Socialist Labour Party of Croatia. Suvar was known as a lifelong Marxist ideologue and opponent of nationalism. So, back to the text. Bayer asks, could it be that the party is introducing, with its opening to the West, a temporary reform similar to Lenin's new economic policy that will be reversed later? Djilas responds, no. Industrial development is too far advanced. The move toward a complex, differentiated society has become unavoidable. For the future, however, allowing a private, quote, small sector economy, end quote, will not be decisive, but much more the fate of the large so-called socialist sector of the economy. This question is still open. Bayer says, the nations of the European common market are moving closer together and forming a powerful economic bloc. Will this bloc attract the East? I'm trying to look this up because, I don't know, when people start talking about the politics of Europe, I get confused. I think this is the same thing. The European single market. The European single market, also known as the European internal market or the European common market, is the single market comprising mainly the 27 member states of the European Union. With certain exceptions, it also comprises Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, through the agreement of the European Economic Area, and Switzerland through sectoral treaties. The single market seeks to guarantee the free movement of goods, capital, services, and people, known collectively as the, quote, four freedoms, end quote. This is achieved through common rules and standards that all participating states are legally committed to follow. Any potential EU accession candidates are required to agree to association agreements with the EU during the negotiation, which must be implemented prior to accession. In addition, through 3 individual agreements on a deep and comprehensive free trade area, DCFTA, with the EU, the post-Soviet countries of Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine have been granted limited access to the single market in selected sectors. Turkey has access to the free movement of some goods via Turkey's membership in the European Union Turkey Customs Union. The United Kingdom left the European single market on the 31st of December 2020, an agreement which reached between the UK and government and the European Commission to align Northern Ireland on rules for goods with the European single market to maintain an open border on the island of Ireland. The market is intended to increase competition, labor specialization, and economies of scale, allowing goods and factors of production to move to the area where they are most valued, thus improving the efficiency of allocation of resources. The common market is also intended to drive economic integration, whereby the once separate economies of the member states become integrated within a single EU-wide economy. The creation of the internal market as a seamless single market is an ongoing process, with the integration of the service industry still containing gaps. According to a 2019 estimate, because of the single market, the GDP of member countries is on average 9% higher than it would be if tariff and non-tariff restrictions were in place. So, that's the European common market. Thanks for listening to these things with me, because I'm not an expert on lots of topics. I'm not an expert on any topic, really, but sorry, I was trying to finish my water, and there was more water in the bottle than I thought, so that took longer than I thought it would. Anyway, Djilas responds, I believe the Soviet Union itself will move closer to Europe, while other East European countries, some more, others less, or not at all, will gradually make overtures to the West. This could lead to eventual separation from the Soviet Union, though none of these countries will completely detach itself from Moscow. Bayer. But Yugoslavia long ago detached itself from Moscow. Could it not embark on a foreign policy course towards the common market? Djilas. These tendencies are certainly becoming stronger in official circles. I am convinced Yugoslavia will not be able to solve Yugoslavia's crisis if Yugoslavia does not in some way attempt to become part of the process of European integration. The government has now decided on serious economic measures. The government has now decided on serious economic measures. European integration. According to Wikipedia, European integration is the process of industrial, economic, political, legal, social, and cultural integration of states wholly or partially in Europe or nearby. Human integration has primarily, but not exclusively, come about through the European Union and its policies. The history of European integration is marked by the Roman Empire's consolidation of European and Mediterranean territories, which set a precedent for the notion of a unified Europe. The idea was echoed through attempts at unity such as the Holy Roman Empire, the Hanseatic League, and the Napoleonic Empire. The devastation of World War I reignited the concept of a unified Europe, leading to the establishment of international organizations aimed at political coordination across Europe. The interwar period saw politicians such as Richard von Coudenhove, Kalergi, and Aristide Briand advocating for European unity, albeit with differing visions. Post-World War II Europe saw a significant push towards integration, with Winston Churchill's call for a, quote, United States of Europe, end quote, in 1946 being a notable example. It's funny because I believe that was Trotsky's vision for Europe. I think he used that phrase too, the United States of Europe as well. This period saw the formation of, obviously him and Winston Churchill wouldn't agree on the social content of the United States of Europe, but it's still interesting. This period saw the formation of theories around European integration, categorizing into pro-integration, explaining integration, analyzing governance, and constructing the EU, reflecting a shift from viewing European integration as a unique process to incorporating broader international relations and comparative political theories. Citizens' organizations have played a role in advocating further European integration, exemplified by the Union of European Federalists and the European Movement International. Various agreements and memberships demonstrate the web of relations and commitments between European countries, showing the multi-layered nature of integration. Back to the text. This is Djilas speaking. The government has now decided on serious economic measures. However, everything is still unfinished and full of contradictions. The change necessary cannot be undertaken by the present bureaucracy. True, even Suvar has become an advocate of a market economy, and it has been decided that foreign capital should enter the country. Even the transfer of profits out of the country is supposed to be possible. Despite all this, however, foreign capital will not enter the country in meaningful quantities because capitalists are not willing to be bullied by the local bureaucracy. The absurdities remain! For example, according to laws currently being drafted, a foreign entrepreneur is allowed to own a factory, but a Yugoslav national is not. Bayer asks, since the publication of your book, The New Class, you have continually pointed out that functionaries cannot simply give up the authority to administer the means of production without undermining their own domination as they understand it. Djilas responds, you have already formulated my answer. The central question right now is whether the party of the state apparatus dependent on it is prepared to divorce itself from the economy. This is unlikely in the near future. However, in Yugoslavia, there is growing tendency to allow the state apparatus to function independently of the party, because the party is split into 8 separate factions which actually function as a coalition and reach a collective opinion on general questions concerning the Yugoslav state as a whole. Since a unified Yugoslav party no longer exists, but only a coalition of national communist parties, there is a chance for the state to become independent of the party. In my opinion, the party state in Yugoslavia is in the process of disappearing, although this process varies from republic to republic. Slovenia is the most liberal, Bosnia in the midst of confusion, Macedonia and Montenegro, there are still rigid regimes, while in Serbia, liberal tendencies prevail in both the economy and the intellectual sphere. Bayer asks, despite all the differences between Yugoslavia and the Western democracies, do you think a rapprochement with the common market can be reached? And Djilas responds, the present government is actually making the attempt, but the system itself is blocking these efforts. There are few in Yugoslavia opposed to these efforts. Even official circles favor cooperation between Central and Western Europe, with the proviso that they be able to retain their own system. This means they are not in a position to cross a certain line. Bayer asks, do young people who have grown up in communist countries dream of the Golden West, or is there still a lingering belief in an ideal but as yet unrealized form of socialism? Djilas responds, there are mixed dreams, but the former tendency prevails. The young people lean more to the West. The concern is less with direct ties to the West than simply with freer structures, with the abandonment of hitherto existing dogmas. Many people look to a freer society which is linked to their conception of Western life. Bayer asks, in October 1988, an authoritarian regime in Chile asked its people if they desired a constitution, a continuation of the existing system. If a similar referendum were held in Yugoslavia, what would be the result? Djilas responds, that would depend on the phrasing of the referendum. If the question were whether Yugoslavia should continue as a unified country, then a large majority of the people would be in favor of it, probably 99% of the Serbians. If the question were phrased, quote, are you in favor of democratic reforms, end quote, the result would also be 80 to 90% positive. Other than that, I think the opposition would do better than it did in Chile. Bayer asks, if there are secret majorities in favor of the common market and democracy, then a partnership between Yugoslavia and West Germany is no longer a distant utopia. Djilas responds, even my father knew everything depends on the Germans. At the start of the Spanish Civil War, my father asked, quote, are the Germans involved, end quote? When I told him this was not yet the case, he replied, quote, then it is not yet a real war, end quote. Bayer, let us speak of peace. How stable is it? Djilas, very stable. The Soviet Union is today weaker than the West and would be left without allies were it to start a war. Also, people in the West can only be mobilized to defend themselves. No one is in a position to attack anyone else. We are now witnessing the total absence of war, the most dramatic moment in the history of mankind. From Belgrade to Beijing, everything is in disarray. New opportunities are opening up within communist countries as well as for cooperation with the West. So, that's the interview. That's the end of it. It really didn't give me quite. It gave me quite a. I guess it gave me a feel for Djilas's later politics, but I was kind of hoping to get a bit of a more feel for his conception of the Soviet system, but as a whole. But I guess I'll have to keep looking for something that kind of gives me that kind of information on Djilas. But thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Goodbye.